So here's an example of a practical example of a sky replacement that I did. And I had video and there's nice snow coming down, but the sky was totally white. So after I knew I was going to want to make the sky a little nicer. So after I took this video, I backed up and I took a picture. I took a photo of the sky, which has more dynamic range, and I adjusted the exposure to the sky. So I brought back those details. And then all I had to do was basically I just tracked a point, and then as the camera pans down or tilts down, the sky moves with it. So I feel like usually when I do sky replacements, the motion is actually very subtle. And in class, we're kind of pushing it to the limits, and I'm learning too that it is smart to keep things subtle. So with that in mind, let's go into After Effects. And the clip I'm going to use is Naomi's 00077. So this is what the clip looks like. I'm just going to adjust the clip to be slightly shorter, just so it plays back better. So could be a little longer. So 4.5 seconds. I'm going to drag that clip onto a new composition. Now this skill, we're not going to use the 3D camera tracker. We're going to track points on this image, and this is a really useful skill. If I wanted to, I could track, well, maybe Elsbeth's hat, and I could post like text wherever she moves. But we want to track something onto the sky, so we should pick points that are in the distance that don't move as much as points in the foreground, because you just got to kind of plan ahead. So I turned it to full resolution, so your tracker, the quality of the track depends on the resolution. As you can see, it gets more pixelated as I go to half, but I can still see a good contrast between that, and I think it'll track a little faster. So I'm going to do half, and I'm going to say track motion. Now, if I just wanted to do something like Elsbeth's hat, or just a single point where the text would stick, I could just use this single position track. But since I want the whole sky to be connected to the camera, and the camera is kind of bouncing around, it's handheld, I should also track the rotation. We don't need to do the scale. So this is what your tracking point looks like when you bring it up. It has two boxes, and there's actually like 3 different things you can grab. You can grab this like origin point, which I like to leave in the center. It's basically like if you move that origin, the tracker is looking at this stuff, but the point will be up there. So it's just like offsetting your tracking point. This inside box is the picture it's looking for. So this is the point where you'd want like high contrast, like this part of the tree. And then this is the search radius. So you can click this inside box and push out the search radius like that. But the bigger the search radius, the longer it's going to take to track. So you don't need a very big search area if you have gradual slow moving footage. If it's footage that's like whipping around really quick, then your search area has to be bigger, because from frame to frame it has to look for bigger movements. So I'm going to track that point. I don't usually like tracking trees, because even if it doesn't look like there's wind, the tree could be kind of blowing a little bit in the wind. So I'll track, but I'm going to break my own rule, because it's an easy point. I might consider the point over here, but it's going to move behind some trees. So I'm on frame 1, and I have my location, rotation, both tracks, and I just hit play. And if you ever want to stop it, or if you ever think it's like losing the track, like that one seems to be losing it a little bit, you can just hit the stop button. You can track backwards. So let's adjust this track a little bit, and maybe I will up the resolution to full. So let's put it more on that. I'm going to go to the, so notice we jumped into this, we're in the layer, we're looking at the layer. If I go back to the composition, I can switch that back to, oh, it is on full. Okay. well, anyways, just keep in mind you have these tabs up here. The composition is where you're looking at your final composition with all the stacked layers, and this we're just looking at the tracking points within this layer. So I'm going to hit play again, and that seems to be doing, yeah, maybe it was fine the first time, but it seems to be more on the point to me now. So now we have these points. I don't see any horrible jumps in motion. So right now, like, these points are just kind of embedded within this layer. There's motion trackers, there's all these keyframes, track point 1. You could just duplicate those keyframes, but the easiest way to bring those keyframes out is to create a null object by right-clicking, or you can also do layer, new, null, or you can do Control-Alt-Shift-Y or Command-Alt-Shift-Y, which is a fun little shortcut to try. So you have this null object, but if we click back to our, so this null object will just be a placeholder for that tracking point. So let's click back to this and go back into our layer tab where we can see our tracking points, and let's edit the target and make sure it's set to null, null1, and we could rename that to track point or whatever, and then just say apply. And we want to apply the X and Y, because X only or Y would just be horizontal information or vertical. So we'll do both X and Y. And now we see we have this tracking point that looks like it's sticking to the motion of the camera. Okay, so then let's bring in our picture. We'll just bring it in on top. I might scale it down. You can also hit S there, or grab this corner and hold Shift as you scale it. So I'm going to scale it. I'm going to kind of try to match the horizon slightly. And then I'm going to parent it to that null by grabbing the pick whip and just dragging to the null. You could also use these drop down menus. So it's set to none, and then I set it to null. And now, as the camera moves and rotates and stuff, the null moves, and then it drives the movement of that thing that that is parented to it. Okay, so we might, add some motion blur, turn on the motion blur to that layer, turn it on to the composition, just so it fits a little better. Now we want to bring, our people in, and this isn't the most efficient way to do it, but I'm going to duplicate this video clip down here, and the one at the bottom is always, I know I haven't really messed with it, so I'm going to duplicate, bring this to the top, and I'm going to call this foreground. And let's turn on our background picture. We can't see it because it's behind the foreground. We're going to use our extract effect. So I just saved my my folder, or my file, extract. It's in the keying folder. I'm going to bring that on top, and you can use these. You can drag the points here, or you can drag the levels here. So we'll just drag them down, and as we've seen before, it's going to cut out those bright areas, and then maybe I'll you can increase the softness of that, so like feather it a bit, and so that is pretty good. One thing I'd like to try, we'll just get into the basics right now. So stick to the basics. Okay, so let's bring in that building again. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this foreground and call it building. And I'm going to turn off the extract effect. So now we can't see through it anymore, because this we just want to focus on. And we could call this like building. We could just call this, I'm going to call it building in snow. But if you had multiple objects, you might want to call it like foreground elements or something if you had a ton of objects. So I'm at the beginning, and now I'm going to mask out this building with the pen tool. So you click the pen tool, and I'm going to just I'm going to click off the frame because I want it to include more. I'm just going to kind of guess to that corner, and I'm going to include some more of the building than it needs. And now, if I go to the tracker, let's see. So if you have like a layer selected, by default, the tracking gives you can track the camera, track motion, stabilize the footage. But if you select a mask, watch what happens to the tracker option. So select a mask and click the mask. Now I can track, it's tracking the mask, and my options change, but I'm just going to hit play. And it's tracking relatively quickly. I think it's going to slip off as the tree kind of moves into the frame. But if you ever need to stop it, just click the play button again. And then you can start it to see your results. So I'll pause it for a second. So it slipped off a little because the tree moves in front of where the mask was. So it kind of has a hard time calculating, but overall, I'd say it looks pretty good. I'm going to open up the mask properties, and I'm going to feather it by 2 pixels. And then if I click off of everything, we see that there's the building. The next thing I want to do is bring the snow back into the ground. So I'm going to be on that same building layer. And if I hit M, it just brings up my mask 1. So I can just see my mask. But by clicking this rectangle tool, and if my building snow layer is selected and I click and drag, let's make a little more space here. I'll click and drag, and it looks like there's some stuff right there that got lost, but that's okay. So I click and drag there, and I'm going to open up that mask 2 and put a keyframe on mask path. And then instead of tracking it, I'm just going to make sure it kind of stays at that tree line. So about right here, I'm going to bring up my arrow tool. You could just hit V to bring that up. And I'm just going to adjust my mask. So that made a new keyframe, and it should. So now it kind of moved it off. So I'm just going to. So I'll pause the video, and I'm just going to add in a few more keyframes. Okay, so with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keyframes, you can see that that mask stays relatively in a good place. Maybe not so much there. But what you can do is feather this out a little bit more. And if you had to expand it, the mask, that would also work. And those aren't keyframed at the moment, the feather, but you could keyframe them if you want. So the idea is when you're trying to animate your own mask, the fewer the keyframes, the better. So it doesn't look like it's jumping around as much. But let's just see how it looks like at 3rd resolution. So now we have our building. We have our snow. It looked like the tracker did something weird at the end, kind of right there. It's a little odd. So for me, I would just say, oh, I'm going to cut that out. So I would just bring in this little endpoint. So now, before you get that weird glitch, yeah, it kind of looks, and that's account of, our trackers were kind of close together. It probably would have been nicer if I tracked like maybe that window. The wider the tracks on a frame, the better, the more accurate the rotation information will be. But this is good enough. So the next thing is we kind of have these white edges, and we want to fill it in with some glow. We want this light to kind of bleed over where it meets these surfaces. So here it's a little confusing at first, but it's a pretty good trick, and it's part of the basics of After Effects. So we're going to create an adjustment layer. So how do you create solids, nulls, and cameras and all sorts of things? Right click, or you can go up to that layer up there, new adjustment layer. And what this is going to do is it's going to, we can add effects to this adjustment layer. And it even has this little checkbox ticked on. That means this is an adjustment layer. This whole thing, basically you could make any layer an adjustment layer just by turning this on. Anyways, we're going to add effects to this adjustment layer, and it's going to read all of the layers below it, apply those effects, and then this adjustment layer will be read. So if I say add a tint effect, and I drag it to this adjustment layer, all the layers below it get tinted. Now, if I say, so what I want to do is I want to create a glow that is isolating just the light areas of this picture. So I'm going to tint it, and to isolate the light areas, I'm going to add something called a levels, and it's under color correction. It says levels, and I'm going to drop that on. And then if you drag in, basically drag in the right side, or the left side, drag in the right, you'll start to isolate. And then this midpoint, I'm going to pull more toward the left. And so now, if we kind of imagine what areas of this picture are going to glow the most, it's the white area. So the greening building and this area, but that's pretty good. I kind of want some more glow around the edges right here. Okay, we can also add something called a glow. So it's under stylize glow, and it's getting really blown out now, but let's first give it a little color. So I'm going to change the color to be more of like a yellow. Let's see, just kind of eyeballing it, what looks, what looked like it kind of fit with the picture, and that's kind of more close to what it was. And then let's increase the glow radius to like 20 pixels, and maybe the glow intensity down to 0.8. If you do like 0.4 or 0.2, you can see it kind of takes away that glow. So 0.7, small numbers can do a lot. The glow threshold just means like at what point does something start to glow. If the glow threshold is at 100%, something needs to be brighter than 100% before it glows. So as soon as you start decreasing that threshold, more areas of your image will glow. And that looks pretty good. The only problem is the snow, but we'll deal with that later. And maybe, areas like that don't look that great. We might even see what happens if, we drop. So that might be actually the best solution. So we're getting some major blown out, yeah, but I think you can tweak that to make it fit your scene better. So now this adjustment layer is reading all those below it, and it's creating this basically a new layer that looks crazy. But if we click this toggles and switches mode and modes, we can change the blending mode of this to something like screen, which means screen is a great one, or add. Add will just, any areas of light it will add, any areas of complete black it won't add, but screen I think is better. And what it's doing is white, areas of white it's adding, and areas of black it's not just not adding, it's becoming transparent. So it's giving us this crazy effect. I'm going to go into the transparency options by hitting T. There's opacity, but you could also just go into transform and there's opacity again. So I'll just hit T, and I'm going to drop the opacity, and let's see at what point does this become not too crazy. So that's probably getting pretty good. Things don't quite seem like they're fitting. So what I might do is in this foreground, or not the, let's see, solo this layer. Where's the snow coming from? Right here. So I'm going to go here and add a curves to the, because I want to add it to the snow, but it's also going to add it to the greening building, which isn't necessarily ideal. But I'm going to go to the red channel and boost the red a little bit, which obviously adds some red. And then I'm going to go to the blue channel and drop the blue, which is going to, if you drop blue, then more of its complementary color is revealed, which is orange. So I'm basically adding some red and orange right now. There. So this is like, it's seeming like a more cohesive image. Maybe I'll increase the glow and then just turn, mess with some of the glow threshold a bit, and maybe drop it down. Okay, and then we could also, to that color, to that sky, which I should have named sky, let's add a curves, and maybe we could have like boosted that a bit. drop that, and maybe maybe add some blue, just maybe not. Okay, so anyways, at this point, I'm just kind of tweaking, but all in all, I would say the image feels much more cohesive than if you just slap it on. Let me see what we're at for time. Okay, the last two things we could add. So let's add this. We could just call this first adjustment layer. Let's call the glow, and then we'll add a new adjustment layer and call it. I'm gonna hit enter or return and hit CC for color correction. And let me add another curves to that CC, and maybe I will pull this area down. So this is the darks. I'm gonna make the darks darker and push the lights a little lighter, or not too much. But you know, the overall color, it's kind of, now is when you want to, this is going to tweak the whole thing. So I'm just adding some like pink or whatever. That's just an optional step. But lastly, something a lot of people like to do, which in this case doesn't make sense, but a lot of people would do it anyways, is to add a vignette. And vignettes occur mainly when you have a zoom lens and you zoom in. The farther you zoom in, the stronger the vignette. But this camera was totally zoomed out. So physically speaking, a vignette does not make sense, but it might add some visual interest. So the easiest way to make a vignette is to add a solid and make it black. So you choose the black color, and let's call this solid vignette. I could name it after, but vignette. And then if you switch the rectangle tool by clicking and holding, going to the ellipse tool, and double click on the ellipse tool, when your vignette layer was selected, it'll create a mask. And let's set that to subtract. You can open up the mask options and feather it out. And you can expand the mask if you want. Or what you can do is hit T to open up the transparency options and just drop the transparency. And you want to be like subtle, like here's 0%, and if I add to 27%, it might add some visual interest. Okay, the one thing, I think this image is a little blown out. I think if you tweaked some of those settings, you might get a better result. But what is successful is it feels cohesive. The color of the sky, the colors match, and let's just see what the original shot looked like. So that was our original shot, and this is our processed shot. So remember, subtlety will take you much farther and is much easier to perform than like something at more extreme. This is more advanced, but at least it gives you some tools of, you know, color correcting. Okay, sorry. One other thing I did that I think actually makes the image slightly better. I'm not sure if you can tell it, but I took out the glow on just the snow and on the greening building. So here it is where it was when we left off, right? And so I have this glow layer that's kind of blowing the whole image out, but it's kind of blowing too much of it out, I was thinking. And there's a really easy way. We already tracked the greening building and we already tracked the snow. So let's just say on this glow, I want to bring back the snow. So, you know, I would go and make that rectangle mask and mask out. You know, you could set a mask, and right now I'm just cutting out. This was an adjustment layer, and right now it's only thing inside the mask is showing up. But if I set that to subtract, that whole glow effect is being it's only outside that mask. But we already animated a mask, remember? So if I go to that building snow layer and hit M to bring up my masks, mask 1 was the greening, which I could have renamed if I maybe right click on it somewhere. Anyways, so I'll just, mask 2 was the snow. So commands or Control C, Command C, whatever you have. Go to the glow layer and make sure you're lined up at the beginning, and then Command V. So we have this animated mask now, but I'm going to set it to subtract. And maybe I will go into the feather or the expansion properties and drop those down a bit, or a little bit. So now we can see like Buck's face isn't like turning neon yellow. and it should track because we had that info. Let's bring the greening building back in. So mask 1, Control C or Command C. So I'm on that layer, I have that selected. I'm lined up at the beginning, because if I paste it here, the keyframes will be offset. So go to your glow layer and then Command V. And now we got to set that. Instead of adding, we don't want to keep what's inside the mask, we want to delete that. So basically I'm cutting stuff out of the glow layer. So now we have a little bit more detail on the greening building, a little bit more detail in the ground, and I think this is a better image than, let me show you the alternative by turning these masks off. So if I set those masks to none, this is one alternative, or this is the other.